When there are no rules, everything's allowed. There's a biblical way to say that. When nothing is forbidden, all is allowed. When there's no God, do what you want. When your God is government, do what you want, unless you're Eric Adams. Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, of course, is being investigated by our Department of Justice, who's deeply concerned about fraud. They're really concerned about office holders committing fraud. The DOJ that had the Hunter Biden laptop for 3.5 years and knew that it was real, that DOJ, the one that understands the Biden family has enriched themselves by like 50 million bucks selling access and giving access and getting prosecutors fired in countries, etc. They're deeply concerned about fraud, deeply so. So they're investigating Eric Adams because Eric Adams came out and said, hey, we can't sustain all the illegal immigration coming into New York City. We are taking over schools and hotels and housing people. And he gets the game. I mean, he was ready to hand out the 10,000 bucks. He just needed some more money from the feds. And they said, nah, do it on your own. So in my judgment, that's why Eric Adams is being investigated. But Eric Adams has a fix in mind for all this illegal immigration. And it sounds like the starter kit to what's apparently being done in the UK, which I don't think you're going to like. I think very few people will like this. In fact, there was a petition to try to get this made law across the board in the UK, and it failed pretty soundly, praise God. So I'll tell you about this move that he wants to make. But man, it could cause war in the streets. I don't want the war in the streets, but it could cause war in the streets. People who've been to real wars, they say, understand that war is in fact hell. My friend Tim Cruikshank is a former Navy SEAL. He did 3 deployments. That means 3 times in battle for us as a medic attached to the SEAL teams. I understand. Corpsman, Tim says medic. Let him choose. He's the guy who did it. And he was a BUDS instructor. So he knows war. He knows prep for war. He came home and wanted to live a different lifestyle. So while being a physician's assistant, he also started a coffee company that I think you've heard of. The coffee's become pretty legendary, particularly among circles like ours. It's Bone Frog coffee, but there's also Bone Frog sellers. Just the same way Tim did with coffee, he understood he doesn't really know the wine making process, so he got mentored by people who understand it completely. So now you have Bone Frog sellers. I don't drink wine. I very rarely have drunk alcohol. Once in the past 20 years, a couple of maybe half a cup. But my friends, many of them just love wine. So we brought them over to the house. We had a testing and a tasting. And my casual friends, they like the wine. It's great. I had it with dinner. My friends who love wine and taste it wherever they go around the country, my friend Tom was particularly appreciative of the Merlot. And he's a Cabernet guy. But he thought both wines were really, really solid. The Merlot was excellent in his eyes. Or his mouth. That just sounds weird. So you can go get this wine. Go to bonefrogsellers.com/Todd. You get 10% off the wine at Bone Frog Cellars. And of course, it says God Country Team on it, just like all Bone Frog products do. And yes, of course, 10% of proceeds go to support the Navy SEAL Foundation to help the families of fallen SEALs. bonefrogsellers.com/Todd. This is Eric Adams talking about a voluntary program to house illegal immigrants in people's houses using faith-based organizations, because Eric Adams is a man of faith.
Discipline, and we're executing on it. It is my vision to take the next step to this, to go to the faith-based locales, and then move to private residents. There are residents who are suffering right now because of economic challenges. They have spare rooms, they have locales, and if we can find a way to get over the 30-day rule and other rules that government has in its place, we can take that $4.2 billion, 4.3 even maybe now that we potentially have to spend, and we can put it back in the pockets of everyday New Yorkers, everyday houses of worship, instead of putting it in the pockets of corporations. And some of those corporations come from outside our city.
Okay, so not putting it back in the pockets of corporations, that's okay. There are these mobbed up banks that sign up to hand out the debit cards with the free money you're forced to provide illegal immigrants, and they charge us money to do that. That's fine. That's great. Take on those mobbed up non-banks, this thugs who are making money to give money to illegal immigrants. Insane. Housing people with faith-based organizations. Okay. They started talking about doing this in the UK. It was going to be voluntary. Well, I'll tell you about that in a second. The New York Times talked about Adams' idea, floats this idea of housing migrants, illegal immigrants in private residences. He wants to start paying everyday New Yorkers to shelter migrants in their own homes. Okay, better than the big companies making money on it, I guess, except creates a marketplace and it creates momentum. And prices will go up, and more people will say, hey, you know what? That spare bedroom we have, or that Airbnb, that VRBO, let's use it this way. We'll get paid guaranteed money. What he's really doing is distributing people outside of the city core so it's less visible. So the disaster is not in people's faces every day, and it's voluntary. Well, until it's not. In the UK, there was this petition. I mean, it's fanciful. It couldn't really happen, but it was a petition to force those who can afford it to share the immigration housing burden. Local authorities have a housing list for locals who have waited over 1 year. Should be mandated to number one, force people with 2 spare rooms or more to house immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees who are on the waiting list. Execute compulsory purchase orders on those with land that is part of a private estate where the private estate has not been used for farming purposes for most of the last decade. Purchased land should have portable, prefabricated property built upon it to house immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees who are on the waiting list. Asylum seekers, immigrants, and refugees who've not paid into the system for the past 10 years should take or leave the first accommodation they're shown and be removed from the housing list. So unless you farm your land, it should be seized and shacks built upon it so illegal immigrants can live there, because we certainly can't keep them in their countries of origin. That's wrong. It's racist, in fact. Well, the petition failed. It was up for 6 months. It only got a very small number of the 10,000 it would have needed to be considered. Thank God. Well, except this from the Washington Examiner. The policy for dealing with illegal immigrants, this is in the UK, has shifted from deportation to indifference to encouragement to subsidization and next to forced cohabitation. An elderly English couple living in the United Kingdom was sent a letter by the Northamptonshire Council. Where do you live? Northamptonshire. Got it. Why don't you just have a Northamptonshire? The Northamptonshire Council that referred to their newly purchased home as empty and derelict to intimidate them into surrendering it to the government so that it could be repurposed into a housing unit for illegal immigrants. This is the same move that people who use eminent domain in America used to destroy 300 or 400 private homes that just happen to be inconveniently located on one of the Great Lakes. Because wouldn't a condo be better there? A condo with a huge tax base? So when Eric Adams floats out this idea, he's just distributing people. He's just making the downtown core less visibly, catastrophically hit by the wave of illegal immigrants. He's creating a marketplace. Other people will build secondary dwelling units so they can house illegal immigrants, but it won't be visible. But don't worry, they'll never go the compulsory route because we in America, we don't go around using eminent domain. Just ask people who it's been used against in order to build condos and headquarters for pharmaceutical companies because, hey, they need views of the lake too.